Imagine opening Google Earth. But this time, you don't just see roads and rooftops. You see inside the house. Who lives there? What are they like? And even if they own a dog. And yes, this is all real.
Looks a lot like, Google Maps. But what you can do is you can then click on an individual record. You can see that we've got 41 years old, Republican, registration, you've got address information, hobby and interest data, how they feel about telemedicine, tax cuts, they support them, gas tax, oppose them. They're a dog owner, which is one of those fields I never thought would be right all the time, but it really is.
But hold on, how is this even possible? Is this even legal? Well, you see, this isn't something new, and in fact has been going on even before Google Maps, or smartphones, or even before the internet was even a thing. Welcome to the strange and sometimes controversial world of microtargeting.
Microtargeting uses your data to influence your vote.
Key to victory is microtargeting. Microtargeting.
Maybe a need to ban this type of microtargeting.
The year is 1964, and this man, Vince Baraba, has just dropped out of UCLA, where he was pursuing his PhD. You see, everywhere Vince looked, he saw everyone touting mass communication like TV and radio as the new way forward for political communication.
I asked to speak to you because I'm mad.
But Vince just didn't see it that way. He thought there should be a more efficient way of reaching voters, rather than just throwing large bags of money for screen time. He even pitched it as a dissertation to his professors, but they rejected it. And so Vince dropped out of school and decided to prove his theory in the field. Lucky for him, the very next year, he got a call from Don, who asked him to come down to Michigan. You see, Don was a Republican running for the House of Representatives, but Don had a major problem. To understand what the problem was, take a look at this map. This is how America voted during the 1964 presidential election. Pretty one-sided, right? Even if you zoomed in on Don's home state of Michigan, it was all still mostly blue. Don's opponent, the Democrat John Mackey, was leading the polls, and everybody expected him to win the election. But Vince, who had become Don's manager at the time, saw things differently. He saw this as the perfect opportunity to test micro-targeting in the real world. Okay, so before I tell you what Vince did differently, I think now's a good time to go over what micro-targeting is. In its most basic form, micro-targeting is just splitting your audience into different groups and feeding each group a different message. Let's take a real-world example to understand this better. Let's say you're running for mayor of your city. Your job is to get the most amount of people to vote for you. So the first step is to get to know your city as much as possible. And not just the data, you also need it to be categorized and mapped out. But where do you find something like that?
We're the largest nonpartisan national voter file provider in the U.S. It's 214 million voters nationwide. Layered on top of that are, of course, all of our telephone contact data, emails. What really makes the data even more powerful is the consumer and demographic data, race and ethnicity, income, education level, hobby and interest data, gun ownership, active duty military, all things you can use to be able to reach the right target.
Great. Now that we've got a good idea of who lives in our city, let's see where we can make the most impact. Looks like our city has a lot of upper middle class families. So, I'll try to win their vote by supporting the causes they're interested in, like a new country club.
The clubhouse was designed to take care of all the golfers' needs.
Or more funding for after-school programs. And you don't just have to do this for one group. You could do it for all of them. Okay, so that's how we would do it today, but how did Vince and Don do it back in 1966? Well, let's go back to Michigan. You see, Vince knew that even if they got all the Republicans in the state to go out and vote, they still wouldn't get enough to win the majority. So they did the next best thing and stole voters from the other team. Vince noticed that a certain segment of people, union workers, had been stereotypically termed as Democrats by most political consultants. But they actually shared a lot of the same interests as Don. The Democrats thought that union workers would obviously vote for them, and so they didn't really pursue them that much. And Vince was going to capitalize on this mistake. But how was he going to find these union workers in a time before computers and the internet? The answer: the IBM 1401. Of course, these were million-dollar machines, and Vince didn't own one. So he did what anyone scrappy would do, and rented one from a local insurance company. But how was this going to help? Remember, Vince didn't have the vast amount of consumer data that we have today, but he did have something just as powerful, the US Census. And tucked inside were key data points like names, ages, ethnicity, and family composition. So late at night, when the insurance office emptied out, Vince slips into the data room. He loads stacks of punch cards, each punched meticulously with census data into the IBM. The machine hums, clicks, and sorts through thousands of cards in minutes, spitting out exactly the precincts Vince needed. He even had a nickname for this setup, Pips. And with this system, he could pinpoint exactly where his union supporters lived. He even sent Don knocking door to door in key areas to win over undecided union workers. And guess what happened? He didn't just close the gap, he upset the polls completely. He won. Microtargeting worked. As he later said,
"At that point, we were in an era of mass communication, and everybody thought that that would be the way to go. We kept questioning that.
okay, but that was 6 decades ago. How has microtargeting evolved to today?
New details are emerging how the shadowy data firm Cambridge Analytica worked to manipulate voters across the globe, from the 2016 election in the United States to the Brexit campaign in Britain.
They showed us how much data they collected, how they modeled it, how they identified people as individuals that could be convinced not to vote, and the types of disinformation that they sent these people in order to change their minds. It was the most horrific 2 days of my life.
Now keep in mind, it's normal for opposing parties to point the finger at each other and say,
they had apps on Facebook that would harvest data not from just the person who used the app, but also their entire friend network.
Thousands of people had signed up for a Facebook app for the campaign. When you signed up for the app, you basically gave the campaign all the information about who your Facebook friends were.
But behind all the smoke and mirrors, is this really how bad things have gotten? Well, I thought I'd directly ask the source.
There's only really 5 providers in the country that do this nationwide. And I would say the world of data is full of people who are charlatans and don't do a good job with, A, they're not good at what they do, and B, they kind of skirt the regulations and they make a bad name for the rest of us.
Now, as with any technology, it ultimately depends on how the people use it that determines whether it's good or bad. And in the case of microtargeting, when used fairly and correctly, it doesn't just have to help politicians, but even small businesses and people like you and me.
I thought it was a really good use case. It was kind of funny because this person came to us initially as a candidate. He won his primary, so we were very happy about that. And he said, Paul, I need something else from you. He goes, I run a pest control business. He goes, do you guys have data for this? And I said, absolutely. So I switched over the maps to the consumer mapping application, went to his area, dropped a pin, created a radius around the area, and found all the people who were homeowners, and I believe it was homeownership and like someone's income, something else like that. But basically finding people who fit his criteria, and then he created a new list, and he's going to do mail, he's going to do calls, he's going to do text, he's going to do all that stuff. And I'm like, what a novel use case of the data.
Thank you so much for watching till the end. Now, if you'd like to hear more from Paul, we actually did a webinar with him, which you can check out right now. He goes much more into depth about microtargeting and the data they have over at L2. Now, for the change makers out there, why not try Call Hub? We have all the channels you'll need, including texting, calling, and relational organizing. And we have a partnership with L2, so you can actually use the data that you've seen in this video. All right, catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.